Hi, I'm Lillian. Welcome back to my channel Ink and Pages. This is my second Buzzwordathon reading vlog. I am really behind on my reading for the Buzzwordathon. I haven't picked up a book for it since March, so I'm 5 books behind. But what I'm hoping to do in the next week and a half is read all 5 of those books in a row and finally be caught up. So the first book I'm going to be reading in this vlog is for the April prompt, which was galaxy themed words. So I am going to be reading The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. This is a sci-fi book about parallel Earths, and the rule is you cannot travel to another parallel world unless the version of you on that Earth has already died. Our main character Kara is quite unusual because on nearly all of the other parallel Earths, the version of her has already died, so she's able to travel to a lot more Earths than other people. This book starts with the news that yet another doppelganger of Kara on one of the parallel Earths has died, meaning she's able to travel to that Earth for the very first time. I'm really excited to read this book. Yes, also because the plot sounds interesting, but mainly because the cover is absolutely gorgeous. I unfortunately had to order this off Amazon because I could just find no other way of getting a book with this cover in the UK. The UK cover is like this purple and black design. I think it's very ugly. Just on its own, but then especially when you compare it to this original cover, it's just so much worse. I don't know what they were thinking, but I'm pleased I got this one and I'm excited to start it. So I'm already 100 pages into this book and I'm really liking it. It's so interesting. I do think maybe the beginning could have started with like a bit more oomph. It started with quite a lot of world building and like a moderately sized info dump, when I think it could have started like in the middle of an action sequence and then later on explained like all the stuff we needed to know. But I am really liking it. There's been a couple of twists that I did see coming, but in like a satisfying way, not in a predictable way. I can already tell like there's gonna be a romance. It's not centered around that in any way, but I'm actually like kind of looking forward to that because I like both the characters, and normally I find love interest a bit like whatever. But at this point I'm like, oh, can we get back to the love interest? Like I want to see how this relationship progresses. So yeah, I'm just hoping it can keep this up. So far I think I'm gonna end up really liking it. So I'm now about 2/3 of the way through Space Between Worlds and I'm still really enjoying it. I don't have very much to update on, but it's not very fast paced, I would say, but it is like pootling along nicely and it's still really interesting and it's still managing to surprise me quite often with some of the plot points. It also really helps that I really like stories about parallel worlds and like doppelgangers and looking at how like, I don't know, one small change can change everything. The butterfly effect, I love that kind of thing. And also it's just like very floppy, so that's fun to read as well. So I have finished The Space Between Worlds and it really did deliver. It ended up staying so interesting and so engaging throughout the entire book. Like I said before, I really love the idea of parallel worlds and parallel universes and seeing versions of the same character across all these different universes. I love this as a trope in TV, especially when you get to see characters that we already know and love, like in different versions of themselves. I absolutely love that. But even though obviously this book has, you know, all new characters and we actually barely get to know them before we start seeing different versions of them on different Earths, I think it still used that trope really effectively and I really enjoyed it. And in particular, this book focuses on privilege because Kara, main character, is able to travel to so many different worlds because the versions of her on those Earths has already died. But the reason for that is that the Karas on pretty much all of the parallel Earths are always poor and vulnerable and grow up in these brutal, dangerous environments. So obviously they're less likely to reach adulthood than other characters, like the privileged ones who live in Wiley City, who tend to be mostly all white, while it's the POC characters who have to live in the desert and in Ashtown and sort of scrape by for a living. One element of this book I wasn't so keen on is that the first half, really more like the first 3/4, does feel quite slow in the way that it sets up for the sort of action-packed last quarter of the book. It did a good job of setting up the world and the sci-fi elements and exactly how they work, but it feels like the pacing could have been smoothed out a little bit more. But there was enough intrigue and twists and turns and reveals throughout the like slower section to keep you hooked and to keep you wanting to read on. The twists themselves were really good. Even if I did actually guess most of them beforehand, I think you'll find them slightly predictable if you're very familiar with like sci-fi storytelling and tropes, but they still felt really satisfying when you did read them, even if you'd already guessed them. It's definitely not a case of the author trying to outsmart and surprise the reader at any cost, at the cost of the story even. It's just very like neatly plotted, and it does a good job building up to the twist, so that it always feels very realistic and well earned as a plot point. And so overall, I think I'm gonna give it, well, it's more like a 3.5 star, but you round up halves to 4. So it's a 4-star book for me, and I'm very excited to have finally finished my next Buzzwordathon read. My next read for the Buzzwordathon is Slade House by David Mitchell, which I'm actually already halfway into. The last David Mitchell book I read, also for this readathon back in February, did turn out to be a massive disappointment. But I'm hoping that is the exception and not the rule to David Mitchell books, because other than Number 9 Dream, I have really enjoyed every other book from his I have read. So I'm hoping this one will be like a return to previous form. This is about a house called Slade House, and every 9 years it abducts someone, and that is all I knew going in, so I don't want to say anything more than that. I think if you just start this book expecting some kind of like weird paranormal things to happen, I don't think you'll be too far off the mark. So I am really enjoying this so far. It's actually quite simple in terms of the plot. I think maybe because it's so short, I think it's just over 300 pages, which is good because, like I said, Number 9 Dream was like such a mess. I really didn't have that much of a clue what exactly was going on in that book. But David Mitchell's writing style is so unique and interesting, and I'm just going to go off on a little tangent about it, and I've thought of a metaphor which I think will best explain my thoughts towards his writing style and why I personally really enjoy it. So a little while ago, everyone was talking about like how they think, and it was this topic that sort of took over Twitter and the internet for a bit, and it basically divided people into two camps. Like, I'm sure there's more of a spectrum, but the basic idea was that you have people who think like a constant internal monologue, like they think in sentences, and if someone was to read their mind, it would sound as if they were like narrating their everyday life and their everyday actions, like full grammatical sentences, and it's kind of like a voiceover. And then you have other people, like myself, who think in sort of like clouds of non-verbal thought. Like, I don't think in full sentences. It could be like flashes of images or memories. Like, it's not always in full sentences. And so if someone was to read my mind, it would be more like a jumble of language and images. And I think David Mitchell's writing style is reminiscent of that and really appeals to me because of that. I'm not trying to say like his writing is this illegible mess of words like don't make sense. Like, no, it's very much a conventional prose writing style. But every now and then he will just do something with a sentence, and it's like my eyes will read it and I will just be able to absorb it in full into my brain without having to interpret it, if that makes sense. It's kind of like I don't need to go from words on the page to what they're saying to the meaning. I can just go from the words to the meaning. I don't know how well I'm explaining this, but my point is I really like his writing style, and I think that the way I think is a contributing factor to how much I enjoy it. But anyway, I am just over, well, I've finished part 3 of, I think, 5 parts. So I'm over halfway, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's so weird. I love it. It is later the same day, and I have finished Slade House, and it was so good. I loved it. I really think this might be my favorite thing I've read so far for Buzzwordathon. I have so many thoughts, most of them good. Firstly, by finishing this book, I have read 10,000 pages this year. Very exciting. Get me? It was just so weird and so good, and I really liked it, but I can't really tell you why because that's spoilers, and I don't want to spoil this for you. Like, literally, if you are interested in reading it, if you are interested in David Mitchell's books at all, if you've read some of them, but you haven't yet read Slade House, like, please, please, please read it. Actually, caveat to that, I'd maybe say if you haven't read The Bone Clocks, maybe read that one first, because this one will make slightly more sense, but you could read it knowing nothing. You could read it having read none of his books, and I hope you would still love it. This is basically a standalone, but the David Mitchell cinematic universe has many recurring characters, so I had to go and look up on Wikipedia like exactly which ones were referenced, because there were a couple of names I thought like, is that a character that was in one of his other books? Like, it doesn't, like, it's not important for the plot, it's just like a fun little detail for people who've read more of his books and are paying close attention. But some of them I was right on. So I found this chart online that like shows which characters are mentioned or appear in multiple books. So that was very exciting. And this just makes me want to go and read the other books of his that I haven't read yet, which is the opposite to how I felt after I read Number 9 June. Like, honestly, that book made me doubt if I even liked David Mitchell at all. Luckily, I do. Slade House was amazing. It was the perfect example of why I love his books. I'm now thinking I should go back and reread all his books I own in chronological order, and then like read the ones that I haven't yet in the order of publication. I think that's probably the best way to read them. But good stuff. A very strong 4-star. I do think it's the best thing I've read so far for Buzzwordathon, and I'm hoping this 4-star streak can continue into our next book. So the next book I am reading is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager, and this is for the July prompt, which was to read a book with the word last in the title. I am going slightly out of order. I'm going to go back and do the June prompt at some point later. This book is about a woman who, when she was a teenager at a summer camp, there was some sort of tragedy. I think people either died or went missing, but something bad happened. And then as an adult, she's invited back to the camp, this time as I think like a counsellor or whatever the word for that is, and I think she decides to investigate a little bit and see if she can work out what happened 15 years ago. This is the third Riley Sager book I have read, and my second one of this year actually, and I've already started it. I'm about 20% of the way in, and while the premise sounded so interesting, I have to say that I have not really been like grabbed by the plot yet. I'm not super invested. I think the main character, whose name I can't even remember, I've sort of realised that she's very similar to the protagonists of the other Riley Sager books I've read. Like, honestly, there's not much differentiating them in terms of personality. They're just sort of there and they make decisions based on what the protagonist of a thriller novel would do. Another thing I'm not super keen on so far is the fact that lots of the other characters are just like being really mean to her, in like sneaky, snide ways, and some are like obvious, blatantly rude ways, and she's just not really putting up a fight. She's just sort of rolling over and letting them manipulate and insult her, and I think that is such bullshit. If I was in this situation, I would be like out there in a second. I'd be like, fuck all of you guys, I don't need this. So I'm finding it quite hard to understand her motivation, I guess. Like, I'm not connecting to her. But I've really liked both of the other books by Riley Sager that I've read, so I'm hoping this one's just taking a little bit longer to find its feet and that eventually everything will be fine. So quick update on The Last Time I Lied. I'm currently feeling very unsympathetic towards the main character. Firstly because she's like, should not be around children at all. She should not be a art camp counsellor or whatever she is. She should not be alone with children as far as I'm concerned. She should definitely not be responsible for 3 whole children by herself. It's just like a major safeguarding issue, and I cannot look past it. It's embarrassing for her, and yeah, I'm really finding it hard to sympathise with her as a character right now. Like, I'm finding it so difficult. Also because people like will be mean and sneaky, and it's all to, you know, build the tension and create like, are they the suspect? Are they gonna do something evil later? Is there gonna be a twist involving any of these characters who are interacting with her? But it's also just making me wish that she would grow a backbone as well. She just doesn't do anything. She just takes everything lying down, and the story tries to justify it by being like, oh well, that wasn't why she was here. She was here to solve the mystery. And I'm like, yeah, but you could also just tell them to like not be a bitch, like don't be a dick to her. I think there's one time that she like tries to stand up for herself, kind of, and there's so many things that just make me think that if I was in her situation, I'd be like, no, you people are horrible, I'm leaving, it's not worth it. And I just can't quite understand why she doesn't think that. Again, the
the story does try and justify it. I just think it's really failing to, and I'm just a little bit frustrated with everything at this point.
So I have finished reading The Last Time I Lied, and unfortunately it did end up being a bit disappointing. The final few twists I didn't see coming, like genuinely I didn't see them coming. But whereas normally that would be a good thing and an enjoyable thing for me while reading a book, at that point I just wasn't really enjoying it. So the twist just didn't hit that hard. The final twist was objectively really good, and while I can appreciate that, at that point in the book I was just kind of done. I was over it. So I think if you're just not really enjoying a book, if you don't care about the thriller you're reading, even the best twist in the world isn't really going to save it. So I'm really torn about what rating to give this book. I'm stuck between giving it like 2 or 2.5 stars, which may not sound like a huge difference, but for me, when I give a book 0.5 stars, I will end up rounding up on Goodreads. So really I'm choosing between giving this book a 2 or a 3 star, which for me are very, very different ratings. A 2 star is like, it was okay, and 3 stars is a mild, I liked it. And I don't want to give it 3 stars, but it does feel kind of like a 2.5, which would then mean I'd have to give it 3 stars, so I'm really torn. I'll just have to make my mind up when I'm reading the next couple of books, and I will let you know what I've decided to give it at the end of this vlog. I am now moving on to fulfilling the June prompt. The prompt for this month was to read a book either with a name in the title or some kind of title in the title, I guess like Mr. or Mrs. or King or Queen or whatever. I have had real trouble deciding what book to read for this, which is why I've done it slightly out of order. My original thought was I would read this book called The Thrilling Adventures of Lovelace and Babbage, which is a graphic novel that's also kind of non-fiction, I think, which tells the story of Ada Lovelace and whatever Babbage's first name was, Babbage, who did something and invented like the precursor to the computer, something like this. And that sounds interesting, but from flicking through that book, it has a lot of information in. Like, it has graphic novel bits, but it also seems to have like just pages of text of very, very tiny writing, just like giving you lots of information, and it has like footnotes, and it just seems quite dense even for a graphic novel. So I decided not to read that one. My next thought was that I would read this book called Cicely Mary Barker and Her Art, which is about the lady who invented the flower fairies. And to be honest, I have started reading that. I'm about 30 pages in, and it's just quite dull. It's just quite dull, and I don't want to talk about it in a vlog because it's not very interesting. So I put that one down as well, and I think I have finally decided that I'm going to be reading Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nouveau, and this is a pretty new book. I hauled it a little while ago, and it's very, very short. So my plan is that I will just sit here on the sofa with my blanket and maybe some hot chocolate and just try and knock it out in one go and update you on my thoughts as I read it. So I lied. I read the whole thing and I didn't update you because it's so short and I was so into it that I didn't want to stop reading to start filming and then say my thoughts. I just wanted to keep reading it, and so I finished it in one go, and it was excellent, just as I suspected it would be. It was so good. Pretty much all of my preconceived notions about this were actually wrong. I think pretty much everything I said in the haul where I talk about this book, I'm pretty sure like 2/3 of what I thought I knew about this book ended up being wrong, but it was still really, really good. I would say it's like kind of high fantasy. Well, it's set in what's obviously a high fantasy world, but there's not actually like that much magic involved in the actual story. It's just sort of in the background, and it's referenced a lot. And there are LGBTQ characters, as I suspected, but it's not the handmaiden, rabbit, and the Empress. Like, there's just a, what would you call that, like a family relationship, I guess. I think she sees the Empress as like a mother, you know, there's no romance between them at all. But I really liked how it was written. I really liked the writing style. It was very like easy and effortless to read while also being quite beautiful and poetic, but not like in an overdone ridiculously flowery way. It was just like
a good level for me. And I'm really, really glad that I liked this, because honestly, I felt a bit bad about picking this book to read, just because it's such a new one. I had this idea like, oh, Lillian, you should be reading your older books first. But you know what? It's 100 pages. It's taken me like an hour and a half to read. And I really liked it. So like literally, what's the point in doubting myself? What's the downside in reading a new book when it's this good? And I think I might give it 4 stars. I don't know. If I do, that'll be a nice return to form for this vlog. It will just be the last time I lied that ends up being a bit disappointing. Hopefully the next book will also be a good one, and we can end this on a high as well. And one final thought is that after finishing this book, I actually understand like what the cover is and what all these animals are, what they refer to, because I was looking at it and I was like, okay, so that's a bird of some kind, that's a rabbit, that's like an elephant or something with tusks, and that is like a lion. I have no idea, but now I've read it, I know what they are. I'm not going to say though, you should go and read this book so you can understand it, because it's really good. So a little more time has passed since I finished reading The Empress of Salt and Fortune, and I have a few final thoughts to share. Firstly, I like how it sort of just plonks you into this world, and you're immediately surrounded by all these names and references and like magical objects and stuff, and it doesn't explain anything. You're expected to catch up with the story and you're expected to understand it. I really like that. That's my favorite kind of world building. I don't like long pages or paragraphs of exposition and explanation from characters or from like their internal monologues to explain all the world building to you. I really don't like that. It feels very forced and unnatural and fake. I just like it when you are dropped in and you have to figure it out for yourself. And so I really liked that in this book, even though it's only like literally just 120 pages, I think. It manages to get quite a lot of world building done, sort of in the background where you're like having to think it through yourself and having to work out what things are referring to. But yeah, I really liked that, so that worked for me. One of the only things I didn't really like is that at the beginning of each chapter there is like a tiny list of maybe 2 to 4 objects that our kind of protagonist, the cleric, I think they're called, I think it's like meant to be like some of the things that they're listing, and so it's like a little snippet of some of the things they're seeing and finding and making a list of. And I didn't like that. I thought it was literally just a few lines at the beginning of each chapter, but every time I turned the page and it was a new chapter, I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to read just like a list of chairs, like a very short list of chairs or list of boxes or list of something I found incredibly boring. And I get that that was aiding in maybe setting the scene, setting the tone, maybe helping out with the world building, but I just found that really annoying, and I was skimming through these by the end, even though they were so tiny. It was a tiny hurdle for me to overcome, but I did not like overcoming it. But that was like the only thing, genuinely the only thing I didn't really like. I did have my doubts beforehand, just a couple, about how well such a tiny story was actually going to be satisfying and how it was going to be fleshed out enough and I would actually like and connect with the characters over such a tiny fraction of what a normal length novel would be. But it actually turned out to be the perfect length. I don't know how the author did it, but it just works so perfectly for such a tiny novella. I actually can't imagine it ever being like expanded into a, I don't know, average 300 or 400 page fantasy novel. Like I cannot picture it. It just works so perfectly as this tiny sliver of story, and it was great. But yeah, I will definitely be picking up the next book, which I think is called The Tiger That Came Down the Mountain, and I think it's a similar idea where our cleric, I keep calling them a cleric, I think that's what they were called, our cleric protagonist, as they find another character within this world, and this character tells them a story for them to write down. Like I think that's what's going to happen in the next one as well, but I'm really keen to pick that one up. So yeah, a very successful read for Buzzwordathon. I have already picked out my next and final read for this vlog, which is going to be for the August prompt, which was to read a book with like a time of day in the title, so something like morning or midnight or twilight
or whatever, something like that. I am bending the rules slightly because I am picking the Encyclopedia of Early Earth. I'm counting the word early as a time period. I think that's fine. The rules are very flexible anyway. This is actually going to be a reread for me because honestly this video needs to be finished, well, it needed to be finished last week. Now it needs to be finished tomorrow. So this is just a very quick graphic novel. I'm going to read through it. I know I will really like it because I really liked it the first time, and I've read two other graphic novels by the author, which is Isabel Greenberg, and I really liked them as well. So I can't imagine this could go wrong, really. So yeah, I'm going to sit down here, read this graphic novel, and then give you a little wrap up at the end. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to look back at all of the books I have read for the Buzzwordathon this whole year and rank them from least favourite to favourite so far, because I think that'd just be a fun little activity for me to do. So I finished reading Encyclopaedia of Early Earth, and it's so good. It's so good. I love it. I actually think I loved it more this time than I originally did, because I checked on Goodreads and I gave it 4 stars last time, and I really think I'm gonna bump it up to 5 just because it's so excellent and I love the story. I love the reading experience. It is just pretty much perfect. Like as a book, it is perfect. Isabel Greenberg is such a master storyteller. This book is like a mixture of fairy tales and fables and mythology and folklore, and so really it is no wonder that I love it as much as I do. I love the illustration style of this as well. This is a book mostly about this storyteller character and his travels, basically, and for every single place he goes to there is a very subtly different colour palette used to the other places, which I don't think I realised the first time I read it, and it's just so clever. It's so perfect. Everything is so perfect. The characters are so vivid and they feel so real, which is incredibly impressive considering that she does this in just like a few panels of drawings and a very small amount of dialogue. They feel so realistic and so fleshed out. Can I say perfect one more time? It's perfect. It's just so rich and immersive from literally page 1, and the whole story has this gorgeous bittersweet atmosphere, which actually all of her books do. I think I said the same thing about her book Glass Town, which I talked about in my winter wrap up, and it's so true. They're just they're exquisite. The vibes were exquisite. It is absolutely, I'm going to say it one more time, perfect. It's a perfect book, and it's not very often that you come across them. So this is the best thing I've read for the Buzzwordathon. I mean, do you want to say hands down? Not quite hands down, but it is, I think, the only thing I'm going to give 5 stars throughout everything I've read so far. It is perfect. So that brings us to the end of this catch-up Buzzwordathon vlog, in which I caught up on 5 months worth. I was hoping to finish this in late August. It's now the middle of September, meaning I'm actually, again, now 1 book behind. That's fine. I'll get to it at some point this month. But like I said, I want to try and put the 8 books, August is the 8th month, the 8 books I've read so far for this readathon sort of in order of how much I've enjoyed them. So starting us off, in last place with no competition is Number 9 Dream by David Mitchell, which I read in January. Oh, it was the very first book I read for this, that's right. It was terrible. Well, it wasn't terrible, it was bad. So Number 9 Dream is going last. Then I think I am going to have to put The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager, which was the July read. I think I still am not entirely sure what star rating I'm going to give it. I think it's probably a 2-star. Don't quote me on that, but do quote me on that. I think it's going to be a 2-star. So that is the second to worst book I've read for this. Next, I think I'm going to put Red Thread, but it's not bad. I mean, like, from this point on, all the books are good. I would recommend them. But in third to last place is Red Thread by Charlotte Higgins. That's who it's by, which I read in February for the February prompt, yes. Then it gets tricky because I'm pretty sure I'm going to rate everything past this point 4 stars. So I think I'm going to say The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson next. Because it was good, it was a 4 star I think, but I think it's the weakest of the 4 stars. So that is going next, and that was for the April prompt of galaxy themed words in the title. Next we have a tie, because I honestly can't pick, but we have This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal Omotar, tied with The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nevo. I really can't pick between them, and I think it's because they're actually essentially very similar books. I would say they have a similar kind of appeal, I think. So they're going next. So top 2, I think in second place I'm going to put Slade House, which was my May read, by David Mitchell. A very nice return to form from him, especially as it's also been last place on this ranking. It was amazing. Really, really enjoyed it. And then we have the Encyclopaedia of Early Earth in first place. Even though it's a reread, I'm not going to count that against it because it was so good, and because I'm bumping up from 4 stars, my original rating, to 5 stars now. It is the best thing I've read for this readathon. So that leaves me with 4 months left of this readathon. I think my third and final vlog is, it's going to come out in December with those last 4 books in. So you'll have to wait with bated breath to see what 4 books I end up reading for this. I actually have no idea. I never really planned beyond this point because I was already so far behind. So I don't know what I'm going to pick up for the last 4 prompts. I can't even remember off the top of my head what the last 4 prompts are. So we'll just have to see. But thank you so much for watching this vlog, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!